Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here, as we're going to be looking at a very common rematch coming up between Method EU and Abrakeydabra. Throughout all of these regional cups, we keep seeing how Method EU has had such dominance throughout it, but Abrakeydabra has been that team salute, constantly trying to be able to push back into that top spot. You know, it's full of MDI veterans, and this time they're trying to make some magic happen.
You know, when we talked to Method EU, and like I mentioned earlier in the stream today, you know, we asked all the teams, what's the team you're worried about, what's the team you're most scared about. They name dropped Team D, and they name dropped, and they did it on stage as well, Fragnance, during the interview, and they name dropped Abrakeydabra. They just feel these two teams are so wild card, so anything can happen. And you know, when talking to Jay actually just now before they went on, they feel they can beat Method EU. They feel that, you know, if they play their best, they can beat them. So I mean, this is going to be a pretty big clash of the Titans here.
Yeah, at this point, it will also determine who's going to move on into the upper finals. That'll make them a game away from BlizzCon qualification here. So Method EU and Abrakeydabra both in that upper semis. And first map is going to be something we have not seen at all in the Mythic Dungeon International here. It will be Siege of Boralus here, Sours, and it's one that Dr. J has already reported to be bringing out some Mage action.
Yeah, as he said, he even told us himself that he'll be playing Mage, so I look forward to seeing what it can accomplish here. Mage is really good at single target redirection in these dungeons where there's an important priority target, they'll blast it. So we'll see if he's able to do that to bosses as well as critical trash mobs, because some of these Alliance trash mobs in this dungeon are pretty nasty compared to the Horde side.
And well, I don't know. You gave me that look, Jack.
I give you plenty of looks.
And not just that, but we're necrotic in Siege of Boralus, right? And the Frost Mage support of just slowing mobs as needed is going to be really important for these teams. But, you know, and Nagura, you and I talked a lot about this. I mean, this is such a Pandora's box. It's so open. Nobody knows what the other teams are doing in terms of strats, Alliance, Horde. What are we keeping? What are we using for comp for starters? Where are we doing our reaping? How much are we going to use the spotter? Spotter is going to be a lot of talk going on for these dungeons. So it's going to be. I mean, we just don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen.
At that point, we're going to have to see if there's any inside scoop, and we'll throw it over to Thist on stage.
I absolutely do have the inside scoop. Method EU has a game ritual that is apparently never failed. They drink one energy drink before the game, and then while playing, they sip another. They listen to relaxing, emotional piano music, or All I Do Is Win. Apparently, it's never failed, and now all of us at home know their secret. Abrakeydabra don't have any game rituals, but what they do have is 2 MDI winners on their team, veterans of the esport, if you will. Despite the added confidence, they have admitted that Method EU makes them nervous. Maybe some relaxing piano music might help? What do you think, Jack?
Maybe some relaxing piano music would be great for us, Lute. And I think we should start mixing that in, you know, the full-on soundtrack. Maybe get like a little Discord bot or something like that for our regular raids.
Oh, that would be absolutely lovely, and I certainly wouldn't have to pull out any more of my hair.
No, you got much left to work with there on that one. But you mentioned a little bit earlier, Sloot, talking about some of the different mobs that they're going to face if we're seeing some Alliance gameplay in Boralus. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's really the Alliance side. What you want to watch out for are the bombers early in the dungeon, and there's a couple of the Dock Masters with the Hounds going on as well. Now, these are available on the Horde side too, but you typically don't pull them. They're post first boss. The 2 first bosses between the 2 factions are more or less the same mechanically. They do have different names just from an immersion, of course, perspective for the 2 factions. After that, you can expect that the dungeon will converge pretty similarly for both of them. But at the beginning of the dungeon is really where the eyes are going to be between Horde and Alliance.
Let's keep a close eye on that one. And we're part of maybe the appeal, or some cases, some of the annoying things about Boralus is the spotters. Being able to deal with any of the spotters, getting that extra damage out onto the mobs here in Nagura. I'm very interested in seeing what your thoughts are on how they're going to be able to control these spotters, how much time they're going to take on them, because they can also use them for the last boss if they want to hold on to them for such a long time.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be very interesting. So we've talked to a bunch of those teams, and they've told us some of their strategies, and there's a bunch of different things they're doing. Some teams play with the spotters, some play without. Of course, almost all of the teams are going to play with spotters on the last boss, but you can even bring 2 spotters. And then some teams play with mages, some without, some play Horde, some Alliance. So we're definitely going to see all the teams split up their strategies, show some different things, and at the end the question is just going to be who has the fastest strategy. And we will definitely see against from Method EU versus Abra who is going to have the fastest strategy, because those are 2 of the best teams in the whole tournament. So we'll see what they do as we see the Mage come out of Dr. J here.
I'm very excited to start seeing some more Mage action, and especially Salute, because it hasn't always worked out for them. We saw Toldagor in particular, where Mage has been broken out a couple times during cup play, and it didn't seem like it was because of the Mage, but more so because of like mechanical failures.
Yeah, you know, they kind of just did the whole stuff of like pulling a ton of mobs at the start. The Mage slows it and deals with it by himself. But has a Mage ever actually won, Saras? I think we talked about this earlier, and then Toldagor. So Mage is certainly not having the best representation. Hopefully, if any dungeon, a brand new one that we haven't seen at least at this MDI, hopefully Mage can bring it here.
We'll have to see as we go into Game 1 between Method EU and Abrakeydabra here in the Siege of Boralus.
We're starting off with Siege of Boralus here for the first time at the MDI, and there are different routes, of course, for the two teams between Alliance and Horde, but I believe they're actually both starting on the Alliance side here, so we can already see a line of sight pull here for Method EU upstairs. Now, Method EU, based on their strategy, has said that they're going to pull a lot of their trash before that first boss, so they should have at least about 2 Reaping Waves worth, whereas Abrakeydabra has tried a lot of sneaky pulls, moving past some of those bombers, but both teams favored the Alliance side for the purpose of better pathing and better mob count at the beginning.
Yeah, that's what most of the people said. We're asking, why do you play Alliance if the mobs are more difficult to deal with? Why don't you just go Horde? But all of the teams pretty much said that they have this like bigger advantage from the trash at the start because you just managed to get so much percentage. I think it was Method EU even that said that they're gonna get up to 50% of trash percentage before they even engage the very first boss, which is just so much, and you don't have to do a lot at the very end of the dungeon. Now, we've talked about the spotters before, which kind of kill the mobs for you, but it is a tyrannical setting, so the mobs don't have that much HP, and it's not going to be that efficient to kill with the spotter. It's definitely going to be more efficient to use the spotters for the last boss, for example, to deal with the tentacles, because it is a tyrannical setting.
Abrakeydabra already in the first boss's room. Captain Red Hook, of course, is named on the Alliance side there. We'll dive into some of the mechanics once the boss is pulled here. Method EU has procced their first Reaping as they're running up the stairs over to that courtyard area that Abrakeydabra has mostly skipped with some of the stealth. And Nagor, what's going to be interesting with the spotters is that every team, as you mentioned, is going to use spotters. However, Method EU is preferring a much more direct strat, something we saw from them in the first cup, where they're not doing anything fancy with the spotter. They're just going to use them for the bosses in the trash as intended, whereas I think Abrakeydabra is boasting use of the double spotter often.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra told us they're going to use double spotters. So they're going to have 2 of the spotters stay alive for most of the dungeon later on, and then they're going to it's going to be so efficient for the last boss to just have double the damage for the tentacles from the 2 spotters. Now, one thing that we just saw from Method EU here, which was pretty efficient, was Sally actually jumping on one of those ledges here, on one of those bagging spots or this teleport spots, and all of the Reaping just kind of teleported or snapped to Zalia's position, making sure the Reaping is there faster. So very well done by Method EU to figure out this spot here, figure out the snapping position. Now, Abrakeydabra did use their Bloodlust and already engaged the first boss.
Yeah, certainly. They actually delayed their Bloodlust for a lot of that first Reaping Wave to get in, but also for the Chopper Red Hook to get into these mines. So the main mechanic of this boss, just because we haven't seen it in this MDI around the MDI season at all yet, is there will periodically drop bombs on the ground. Now, you want to walk the boss who fixates one of the players in the group into those bombs. Not only does he take a huge chunk of damage, but increases damage taken by 15% for a brief period of time. You can see Dr. J is currently the one kiting here for Abrakeydabra, doing well in a nice circular fashion, moving away. And of course, he does spawn some extra mobs on the side. One of them are the riflemen that will shoot random players in the group. Nothing too dangerous, but really the other ones are melees that do a huge frontal shockwave and can stun players and pretty much one-shot them in this 19 dungeon. So they have to well communicate or hard CC with a stun or disorient, what have you, before they get that shockwave off.
Yeah, so one big difference to note between those 2 teams here is that Method EU did not engage the boss fight yet, but they have 43% of their trash already. As I mentioned before, they will get up to 50% before they even engage the boss. Well, Abrakeydabra, they did the boss already. They're going to move on here, so they're going to have to do a lot of trash later on. And this is probably because they're playing this double spotter strategy that we've talked about earlier, and Method EU is not.
Exactly, that's exactly what we wanted to emphasize. There's a huge emphasis from Abrakeydabra on the double spotter play and heavy reliance on it. So they have pulled their first spotter. We can see it right there in the corner on the side of the screen for Abrakeydabra, on the right side of the screen for those at home. We can see the amount of damage coming down from their strikes coming with the spotter. Now, you want to make sure not to kill them. If you get within melee range of the spotter, it will start meleeing its active target, the tank in this case, and briefly and oftentimes disengage away from the target, making it quite the pain in the butt to deal with. Now, you can root it, of course, nova it, punt it, if you will, making sure that it doesn't get too far from the group. But the strategy of Abrakeydabra here is very heavily reliant upon the blasts on the ground, whereas Method EU will be using them, but to a much lesser extent, which is why they killed this 50% trash so far.
Yeah, and one more thing to note is, of course, if you drag 2 spotters throughout the whole dungeon, then there's more difficulties than just keeping them alive, but you also constantly need to make sure they're walking with you because they have this mechanic that kind of disengages away from a player if you get too close. So sometimes the spotter might be out of range and not actually casting his ability. That is the most important thing that you want to happen. So you definitely need a lot of coordination. You need mostly the Ras to do it, to just use the root, the master to make sure they stand in position, they stand still. And Abrakeydabra already on the second boss, while Method U is still working the first one.
And Jay dropping off some of his artillery strike there on the side right now. But yeah, I mean, 13% is a lot of trash in this dungeon, and a lot of it will be very boosted after the second boss, which has been engaged here for Abrakeydabra, of course, Captain Lockwood here. Now, 2 phases to this boss. She will often kind of disengage back to her ship where she won't be able to be targeted and summon 3 mobs, including a cannoneer on the side. We can see the cannoneer in there. Once you kill the cannoneer, he will drop a cannon, his cannon, on the ground that you need to use to blast the ship that the boss is on. Once you do that, the boss will rejoin the fight for another, I believe, 30-40 seconds of phase 1, where the players are able to just get as much damage in as possible. For sure, she will disengage back to the boat one more time.
You see, Method U down the first boss, they use their shrouds to skip a lot of the trash here. Now they engage their first spotter as well. They're going to deal with some of the trash here, making sure they use the friendly fire, of course, to deal with it. While now actually dropping very low because of necrotic. Now, one thing to note as well, which is an advantage for the Mage comp, is the necrotic, right? The Mage is having the slow, making sure everything is a lot slower and a lot easier to kite for Divine Field. Well, now does have a little bit of a harder time, but they do have the Ring of Peace from the Monk, which is also really good. And Abrakeydabra choosing to not have a Monk at all. They switched the Monk for the Mage instead of switching a rogue for the Mage, right? So they don't have this Monk buff, the physical damage buff, and they don't have the utility from the Monk. So this is probably because they wanted double Shroud or they needed the rogue utility, but interesting to see that they're just not choosing to have 1 Monk.
Yeah, I mean, that 5% debuff on the mob is quite important. Method EU, we can see, playing that safer non-spotter strat as they kill the first spotter off before getting into the second boss's room here. Have not engaged. Actually, they do, just as I say that, Dread Captain Lockwood has been engaged here for Method EU, and it is about to fall here for Abrakeydabra. 1/3 health left on them. They probably still have 1 more phase 2 that is going to accompany the rest of the fight, but we can see some more artillery strikes coming down there in the melee range. And of course, we do have our appropriate affixes up now. This time it is skittish, I promise. It is skittish here. So really a non-factor with the high threat of the Prot Warrior tanks. But the one to watch out for here is Necrotic. Now, unlike Toldagor, where the cannons handle a lot of damage in Necrotic, they're not so much of a factor to the tank. The spotters don't exactly do their ability all the time, not to mention it takes a while to strike, so the tanks do have to face tank a lot of these mobs for an extended period of time. So once again, Necrotic does become a bit of an issue, and advantage here certainly to the Frost Mage.
Yeah, and one more thing to note about the spotters, artillery, the friendly fire damage they do to the mobs. The reaping mobs are actually, some of them are immune to the damage from the spotters. The high HP reaping souls are immune. The low HP reaping mobs are not immune. They can be killed with it, but the higher mobs are the ones that are the important ones because they are the ones who have the most HP and then need to be dealt with. So the spotter is not going to deal with all of the mobs for you. There's also demolishers later on in the dungeon that do have a lot of HP that are not getting damaged by them either. And there's a bunch of mobs that are just straight up immune to their damage.
Abrakeydabra running up to the kind of the wall built there by some of the Ashvane company, making sure to try and keep the players out, and you have to tag the front of that wall to stop the burst of fire from the rifles coming in and get past that small gauntlet. Big pull coming in here for Abrakeydabra right now as one of the Demolishers is pulled with a ton of mobs. We can already see the Frozen Orb going down from Jay as he runs around the corner trying to get as much damage in, keeping in that Blizzard as well, so Divine Field can kite when things start to get a bit out of hand with a lot of that Necrotic coming in. We can see the Swirlies coming down from the Bananas. Of course, the Buccaneers that are in there drop a lot of bananas on the ground. Should you slip on them, you actually get stunned for 2 seconds. Hugely aggravating, very difficult for the players to see, so you kind of need to keep moving and watch your feet at all times.
Yeah, one more advantage here with having the Mage is you have 2 ranged targets, and these Buccaneers who are throwing the bananas, they actually will throw them at range if you have at least 2 ranged targets. But if you don't have the Mage, you of course only have 1, and therefore they're going to be sent into melee range. And the closer you are to the Buccaneer, the less travel time the bananas actually have. So the closer you are to the mob, the faster they're going to hit you, and it's almost impossible to dodge them if you're directly in melee range of a Buccaneer. So Method EU is definitely going to have a lot harder time dodging those bananas as they're going to be thrown into melee.
Yeah, I'm just kind of giggling there. Jay got caught on the fence there trying to drop one of the strikes off, and if he didn't move fast enough, he was going to get clipped by it, but managed to avoid any certain doom right there. As 3 Demolishers still are being chewed away by Abrakeydabra. These have an immense amount of health. They have a huge frontal shockwave strike that will just, I mean, demolish you. No pun intended there. I know their name, but it will do a huge amount of damage. And then on top of it, they have an area denial with an AoE fear that you need to move away from. So it's just mini boss style mobs that take ages to chew through, similar to a lot of other dungeons having that present as well, such as the Peacekeepers and Motherlode. So a lot of health to chew through here as Abrakeydabra is approaching their 3rd Reaping Wave, something that Method EU has already dealt with and is now going through the entire area and skipping most of these mobs with one of the Rogue Shrouds.
Yeah, so Method EU, it looked like they were behind, but they're actually ahead. You can see they're 7% trash ahead. They can skip all of this trash that Abrakeydabra actually had to deal with. And they're out of combat. They did not drag the spotter through the whole boss fight and dealt with the mobs. They killed off the spotter, dealt with the boss fight, got out of combat, used their stealth to skip all of this trash here, and now they're onto the next spotter. So Method EU ahead at this point. Well, Abrakeydabra though, they still have this one thing in their back, which is a double spotter, right? They're gonna be faster in the last boss for sure if they play it right, because they're just gonna have more spotter damage on the tentacles.
Yeah, bit of a slip up there from Method EU as Fragrance's Cheat Death does proc. Not going to have that available for the rest of the dungeon. It's a 6-minute cooldown. Ashine, unfortunately, does get clipped by one of the Shadow Smashes for Abrakeydabra now. 1-minute debuff of 20% max health decrease as Divine Field starts to get away from these mobs and try to reset those necrotic stacks with support from Dr. J, the Frost Mage right now. Finally managing to do so as they chew through the last of these 3 lost souls. Now, these are the ones from the Ettins, the Demolishers that we saw earlier that have such a high health pool, and as a result, they have 50% of the original mob's health, but Swag goes down on Abrakeydabra. First death of the series between these 2 teams. Immediately reses, of course, that Cheat Death will also not be available for 6 minutes, and tries to run back to aid his teammates right now, as once again the spotter rains down Hellfire all over these mobs. Method EU looking nice and solid as the 4th round of Reaping has joined them just before the 3rd boss's room. Commanders charging in and out of the pack. These are not hit or affected by the rain of fire down from the artillery strike down from the spotters.
It is actually a very difficult moment for both of those teams, as you have those snipers and the commanders just trampling around and stunning you if you're in their path. And then you have the snipers who constantly shoot random targets. Usually in live servers, you will play this a little bit slower. You just see the snipers, make sure the artillery from the spotters is bringing them down, and then you engage them at the very last second to make sure you get the percentage. But here, of course, you want to be as fast as possible. So you have the snipers just shoot around, you have the trample go everywhere, so you want to make sure you dodge all of those abilities. And one thing to note as well is that Abrakeydabra, Elsorad did just managed to get the Shadow Melt off to drink, because he's in combat this whole time because of the spotters that they're dragging through the whole dungeon.
Important to note these comps as well, as these commanders do an AoE bolster that decreases damage taken of their allies by 70%, and you can dispel or spell steal or purge have you, but these teams don't have that, and they're playing alliance. They don't have access to Blood Elves right now, so Dr. J is really the only person that can make any work of that for Abrakeydabra, as they just pull all of the 3rd boss's trash into the hallway and try to cleave it down. 89% on the board, so much damage going out, as Method EU comfortably sits at 99% and has already started on Dark Fathom, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Not a particularly difficult boss, but Gingy just sneaks out past the statue a bit too early and gets clipped here, proccing his Cheat Death. Neither rogue on Method EU will have that safety net available for the rest of the dungeon, as Abrakeydabra with their own set of troubles right now. Ashon going down, and the battle res comes up immediately. 1 left on the board for Abrakeydabra as they cleave everything else down and desperately need to get started on that 3rd boss to keep tabs on Method EU here.
They definitely need to catch up on Abrakeydabра's side. Now, I did mention they're going to have double spotter, so they're going to be faster in the last boss. But at this point, they're already 40% boss HP behind on Dark Fathom. And Dark Fathom is a boss that does not, like, it's not going to be faster if you have spotters, because they are not doing damage to the boss. So this boss definitely is not going to be faster for Abrakeydabra. One thing to note is that they both have their Bloodlust available, so they're both going to save it for the last boss fight. But how much time is it really going to save Abrakeydabra?
I don't know, but the Bloodlust does come out here from Abrakeydabra as they engage Dark Fathom finally. Excellent view there from our observers just a moment ago. So the main mechanic really to this fight is that these tidal waves will spawn from either one of the 4 walls of this square room, and you need to line of sight the wave on the opposite side of the statue in the middle. We saw Gingy get a bit overzealous earlier and try to dip out and keep DPSing the boss while the wave was coming in, and it procced his cheat death, essentially killing him, but because the rogue talent was available, he did not die. Abrakeydabra following suit right now and hiding behind the statue, doing well to avoid any one-shots or damage to the group as the tank tries to stay within range of the boss. Now, the trick to this boss is there is a bit of a frontal that goes on the tank, a kind of line of a frost strike. We can see it displayed here on Mythic EU side on the left. If you stand right inside of his hitbox as the tank, he will never hit you with it. So easy for the tank to deal with that, but the melee constantly have to dance around the increasing amount of area denial.
Yeah, so Mythic EU is on 10% on the boss here. They are going to down it any second now, and they do have the Boralus available for the last boss, while Abrakeydabra actually chose to save it. Now, they probably chose to use it, sorry. Now, they probably used it because they do have the double spotters, so the last spot is not going to take them so long, and the damage from the spotter is not actually getting increased from the Boralus, of course. So that's probably why Mythic EU chose to save it, and Abrakeydabra did not. But at this point, the boss going down, they only have to deal with the last spotter, and we see a Shine actually going down. They do have a battle rest available to them, so they should be able to get him back up. But at this point, they're out of battle rests, and they have 3 deaths, meaning 15 seconds between them as well.
Yeah, they didn't fathom this kind of damage coming in on them right now. For Dark Fathom himself, only at 50% health. I mean, there's a lot of health to chew through on this tyrannical boss. Mythic EU finally downing the 3rd boss. No trash left on the board for them except the spotter that they're carrying around right now, which they will use to kill at the end of the dungeon for the final reaping area that will, of course, skip. Now we start on what is probably the longest boss of any of the BFA dungeons. Viscoth here, he's kind of that evil tentacle octopus monster there. The team does get started on these tentayayakles on the side right now. Name of the game is you need to kill the gripping tentacles to free the engineer in them. Once the engineer gets freed, they will be able to repair the cannon on one of the platforms. You use the cannon to shoot the boss for a 1/3 of HP, and you repeat this 3 times over to finish the boss. However, the demolishing terrors will be spawning periodically.
Yeah, this is such an important game right now. Not only is it Mythic EU and Abrakeydabra playing against each other, but this is the first time we see Siege, and I can guarantee you that all of the teams who participate in this tournament are going to be watching those teams right now, because none of the teams know the other team's strategies, and they don't know how fast they're going to be. So they're going to be watching this exactly, looking what both of those teams are doing, and then try to adjust their strategy if theirs is slower than either Mythic EU or Abrakeydabra, and maybe even steal some of the strategies. We've talked to teams before, and some of them really thought, you know what, we didn't really practice this certain dungeon because we're just going to watch the other teams play it on the first day and then most likely just copy it.
Yeah, and I mean, they're forced to watch it too because if we tied them to the chair and they have to watch these dungeons, they have absolutely no choice. But no, jokes aside, I mean, this is completely Pandora's box is open with this dungeon, as we mentioned earlier. Abrakeydabra just finally downing the 3rd boss, sits at 97% trash, which is the remaining 2 spotters that they have. But they're a fair bit behind. 15 seconds on the board from the 3 deaths alone, not to mention Vic Goth, is about to finish the 2nd phase for Mythic EU. Even a double spotter won't get them out of this pickle that they're in right now, Nagura.
Yeah, one more thing to mention here is that the boss got changed just recently. Now, there was a small little trick you could do where you would root the Demolisher tentacle, and it wouldn't cast the AoE that happens if it's not tanked. So the Demolishers need to be tanked usually, because if they're not, then they cast this huge AoE. But there was clever use of game mechanics where you just root it and it just kind of assumed that it's being tanked, not casting the AoE. But it got fixed at this point, so it actually needs to be tanked by the tank or anyone else, really, because if there's no one in melee range, no one tanking it, then it does an AoE. And that's why we see now actually being in the Demolisher here.
And we can see Mythic EU now on the final platform. This is what they saved their Bloodlust for, as the last gripping terror goes down quite rapidly, using that last spotter and the power of Bloodlust. They're going to wait for the bit of RP, the role-playing, to happen here as the last cannon is repaired, and they will fire off the final cannonball into Vigoth to make sure the boss is keels over. They kill the spotter as well, and they cheer behind us right now as Mythic EU take the first game in our first ever Siege of Boralus.
Very impressive performance here by Mythic EU, and you gotta know that's such a good feeling going into that tournament. We haven't seen anything from Siege of Boralus thus far, and it really seemed like, while we were able to look a little bit at Abra taking advantage of the double spotters, it just wasn't enough because the control of the DPS there on Method EU side was just insane here, Sours.
Oh yeah, I think the biggest difference between these two teams was how they went about the first half of the dungeon. Now Method EU had, what was it, like 60% kill count at the very start of the dungeon there, where they talked a lot about how we were asking them, why don't you guys just play Horde in this dungeon? And like, oh well, we've discovered this route for the Alliance side of Siege of Boralus where we get a massive amount of kill count before the first boss, which will allow us to go extremely quickly in this dungeon. And we just saw where we thought, okay, maybe they're behind of Abrakeydabra for the whole 2 bosses, and then all of a sudden they caught up on the 3rd boss, and then they took a commanding lead. And we saw this Abrakeydabra only had 23% count as they downed Chopper Red Hook here, and then they only had 42% when they finally were able to down the 2nd boss. And this count difference between the 2 teams, the kind of fun and games that Abra was trying to play with the spotter all dungeon, I don't think really ended up working out for them as well as Method EU strategy, which was just kill everything as fast as possible and go as fast as possible. We're not trying to play any funny games here. And that worked out incredibly well for Method EU. They were at least 2 minutes ahead at the very end of this dungeon here. This is quite a long last boss of the dungeon, and they had a significant gap between them and Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, it seemed on Dark Fathom is really where there was such a substantial difference from Method EU and Abra, because just how much you had to move as the mage there was just eating up a ton of time. They're just sitting there behind at like 50-60% or something like that, Nagura, as the other team was just moving on to the last boss.
Yeah, it's not only that. I mean, of course, there's a lot of moving for the mage, which costs you damage, but then there's also, you're in combat the whole time, right? So from the first time they pull the spotter until the very last boss, they're in combat the whole time. The only time they can get out of combat is Shadow Melt. So they can't use a lot of potions, because if you use them in combat, of course, they don't go off cooldown. So you can only reset your potion by Shadow Melting once in a while or vanishing as a rogue. So in total, it just cost them more damage as they actually gained.
Yeah, and at that point, it just started pushing them so far behind their opponents, and it was very convincing, very commanding really lead going out onto that one. But I'm interested, Slutin, in your thoughts on Waycrest, because we've seen this dungeon be something that Method EU has just absolutely dominated in and out.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, Jack. The thing with Method EU, so once again, we come back to, we talked to all these teams, the basics were out of the way right away. What's your best dungeon? What's your worst dungeon? Method EU, for them, Waycrest. They say Waycrest is their best dungeon. On the flip side, Abrakeydabra said that Siege of Boralus they felt was their worst. So we'll see which one kind of plays up here. Interesting note from Abrakeydabra, if I'm not mistaken, they will have a fairly interesting comp coming up in this dungeon. I'm not sure if they're going to stick to their guns on that one, but perhaps even just outside the mage, we'll see some new classes. But I mean, if there's any team that says they're dominant, they're not going to lose a map, it's Method EU. And if they say they're dominant and they're not going to lose a map, they're probably not going to lose the map. So it might be another 2 over Abrakeydabra, but we'll see. I mean, anything can happen on this map.
Anything can happen, and I guess it is just kind of poor luck, or maybe it's on the side of poor practice if they're going from their worst dungeon possible to their opponent's best. But we'll have to see on the other side of this break. So don't go anywhere. The MDI will return right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. If you'd like to support WoW Esports, whether it's the MDI or AWC, be sure to check out the Transmorpher Beacon or Hoarder Alliance fireworks, as proceeds will go toward the prize pool at the end of the year at BlizzCon. I'm Jack, and joining me for Game 2 between Method EU and Abrakeydabra, we've got Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. As we're looking into Game 2 coming up, going to be in Waycrest Manor with Tyrannical, Teeming, and Explosive. And Sours, we've seen some incredibly big and aggressive pulls here earlier when we saw 40k play.
Oh yeah, in Waycrest Manor, what's funny about Method EU is while they had like the best time in this dungeon ever during the cups, they actually said that they copied Team D strategy in here, that they tried to improve on it and they couldn't find any way to do this dungeon any better. However, with teaming, you have to find a new way to do the dungeon, because teaming drastically changes your kill count and routes.
Monk! We got a monk! Elzrad is going to be busting out the Mistweaver here, and no surprise to see the other DPS. Elzrad, I'm so excited here. We're breaking out the Mistweaver. This is what I've been wanting to see for a while now. Just get some different healers. Give it to me.
Jack, the last time I saw a Mistweaver monk was actually in the Jurassic Park exhibit at the local museum.
They're not out of it yet. Sloot, as we're bringing in the Mistweaver monk. I'm very excited to be able to see it. And that 5% vulnerability staying with the comp would be very fun here, Nagura. I'm excited. Yeah, no more druids.
This is actually what we want to see with the unlimited swaps. This is why we have it here on the land, so we can actually see those kind of swaps, because otherwise West, we've seen teams switch to a DK, but they weren't able to switch to the Mistweaver because there was only one swap available to them. But now they can actually do it. They can bring the Mistweaver. Now, the only reason they are bringing it is because of the 5% physical buff.
Whoa,
so
wait
let's
a
be honest
minute.
here.
If it was up to me, I'd never bring a healer.
Yeah, right you are, Ted. As we're going into game 2, don't let me down here, Elsrad. Abrakeydabra is going to need this one to stay in the series as we go on into game 2 in Waycrest Manor.
I mean, there is no Waycrest in my mind that Method EU is going to lose this map. According to them, it is their strongest map by far, and they get right into the thick of things as they dive down on the sister Triad right now, pulling all the trash on the side. A lot of explosives coming up right now, making sure to cleave them down. Gingy, of course, being on that rogue, the only rogue at present right now because Fragnance has swapped over to Unholy DK, so almost mirror comps on either side, but we do have the Mistweaver versus the Resto Druid.
I'm just so excited to see this map because 40K, we talked about it before, did not have a lot of time to practice, but 40K did so many huge pulls in this dungeon. So if they, with limited amount of practice, can do those huge pulls, then what is Method EU and Abrakeydabra are going to pull out of this dungeon, especially when Method EU says that it's going to be their best map, right? So we're definitely going to see some huge pulls from those two teams.
I'm actually going to spoil it for you right now because they did tell us that the maggot hallway in Raal's area, not only are they doing the entire hallway with the maggots, but also apparently pulling all of the survivalists in the lodge area. So that's going to be a very bold claim from them if they choose to actually go through with that pull. But Method EU sitting pretty here right now as they're finishing the last phase 1 on Sister Briar. Not far behind at all. Abrakeydabra right on their tails. 6% on the board for trash for them too. These teams completely neck and neck here at the start of the dungeon.
Yeah, Method EU, just the slight difference. I mean, both of them do have the physical damage buff, right? The only difference is going to be one DPS is a rogue, while the other one is the Windwalker. So we'll see who does better here. Now, we know that rogues are very good, as we've seen too almost all the time in those comps. So I assume that the rogue is going to pull out more damage overall, but we will see. And then we do have the same utility as well. So Elsrad, of course, having this Ring of Peace as well that will be useful, especially in this dungeon. We don't have anything like Necrotic, but because of those very small hallways, the Ring of Peace is just so helpful in this dungeon here in Waycrest.
Yeah, I don't really think they're going to get too much advantage out of the double Shroud coming from the double Rogue right now on Abrakeydabra, but Rogues are never a bad thing in dungeons. We've come to learn this MDI, as we usually see at least one of them per group right now. Sister Briar at 25% in just a moment here for Method EU as they close out the first boss just a bit before Abrakeydabra, who is just now hitting 35% on Sister Briar. So trying to efficiently drag her towards the exit of the room and what I expect to be a pretty aggressive pull coming up.
Yeah, one more thing to note here is that Mistweavers usually do have mana problems, and this is a tyrannical setting. This is why those boss fights take so long. But this Triad fight is probably the most difficult fight in this whole dungeon. So Elsrad was out of mana at the very end, but he didn't manage to heal it, so he should be fine for the rest of the mobs, for the rest of the bosses too. Sorry, but yeah, again, tyrannical setting. And there is a lot of bosses in Waycrest Manor, so they're going to spend a lot of time just single targeting and dealing with boss fights in general.
There's a mean pull coming in here for Method EU as you've already dropped the Ring of Peace from Mirrors as any support he can give to now right now. Of course, we are in a tyrannical setting, so the trash not as dangerous as we've seen in some of the Cup predecessors, but the Soul Weavers in here, the Charmers, everything, including the Dread Captains, just does so much damage in this wing particular to the tank. Conversely, to the next wing in the Raal Hall, that does a fair bit of tank damage, but a huge amount of splash damage on the group in the form of the Spits from the Maggots. So let's not jump the gun too quickly, though. We will get to that portion. Abrakeydabra, a different bit of routing here as they actually find themselves in the courtyard in front of Soulbound Goliath, looking to try and proc their first Reaping, which Method EU is just 1% shy of doing here.
Yeah, one more thing to note, of course, is that Mistweavers and Resto Druids do have different things they can dispel, so that's something that we want to watch out for in this dungeon too, because this dungeon does have a lot of debuffs, a lot of dispellable ones, but also not dispellable ones. Now, for example, one debuff here on Stally, this is a Disease, which cannot be dispelled by Resto Druid, but they have the Windwalker who can dispel it for the Resto Druid, so it's definitely not a super big disadvantage for them. Now, the other thing is Curses though, which does happen on a tank, which increases your damage taken, so not being able to dispel that one might cost you later if you do some huge pulls and not being able to get rid of this of the curse. And then there's also another one who's what silences you, but with those full melee setups, as long as it doesn't go on the healer, they should be fine.
I'm sure it's very premeditated from the groups and well practiced that they won't get in any trouble with any debuffs that they can't dispel. Hopefully we'll see. But a lot of the dangerous curses are actually kind of done now, well, at least for now, until they get down to the basement. This wing really carried a lot of them. The rest will just be raw healing output needed for those maggot spits. But first we need to deal with the rest of the courtyard, and likely the second round of Reaping proc that both teams will opt to carry into the Soulbound Goliath. 26% on the board for Abrakeydabra as they rush down through the rest of the... they actually pull a fair bit of the Raal area into the courtyard. They opted to skip a bunch of the captain area. But Mythic EU not wasting any time, actually. They're not even waiting for their second Reaping. They just go right to Soulbound Goliath on top of Matron Brundle. We do know how dangerous this boss is and how long it takes as well in this tyrannical environment. So I'm kind of surprised from them, Nagura. Usually you'd expect to see a bit of efficiency with Cleave coming from the second Reaping wave. That we actually saw them do that in previous Waycrest Manors during the season.
I'm pretty sure they are going to proc the Reaping Wave on top of this boss once the trash mobs are done, because the mini boss here, Brindle, does give a lot of percentage. At least I assume they are 4% off, and Brindle is still going to stay alive for a long time. Now, this mini boss is actually very difficult to deal with because it's just so much tank damage, but it is tyrannical, so the mini boss is not buffed. Now the boss is buffed though because it's tyrannical, so now it does have to be careful here, but usually Prod Warriors are just so good for Goliath, and they don't take that much damage at all. But we see him actually drag it into the fire now, and we will see the AoE damage come out.
The boss does go for a little bushwhacking session there as he does start to spit fire on the rest of the group, wanting to make sure you keep those stacks of increased damage and control. As good as Prod Warriors are dealing with these just constant physical hits that are blockable, eventually you will just run out of gas. You cannot keep that shield block up 100% of the time with the current meta of tank spec for these Prot Warriors. So eventually they do a little bit of a reset and they opt to pull some of the mobs. So indeed, Matron Brindle was not enough for their Reaping, but these Thorn Shapers on the side should just be dandy to get them past that 40% mark and be able to spawn the second Reaping on top of the boss, which takes very long. So they are trying to still be as efficient as possible and cleave everything on top of the boss just in a more controlled manner, something that Abrakeydabra has already done. They've already completed their second Reaping wave and are at 72% on Goliath right now, not far behind at all.
Yeah, this is pretty close between those two. As yeah, Method is slightly ahead on the boss HP, but they're behind in trash, and they still have to deal with the Reaping Wave, as you said. Now, Soalia, if you look at the mana, it's actually really low on mana. He just barely swapped into cat form here to make sure he doesn't get hit by the Thorn ability from the boss, not getting stunned here. But we see the Innervate come out of Soalia, so he should be able to recover here, making sure everyone is still alive. But again, a tyrannical setting, this Goliath fight is going to take a long time still from now on, and they have to deal with the Reaping Wave, so mana might actually be a problem later on.
Interesting note, a bit of an advantage for Xaylia as well is that he's able to shapeshift and get rid of that Thorn's Cage debuff that comes in for the boss should he get targeted. So could be a bit of an RNG advantage there for Method EU should Xaylia get targeted non-stop by those. Soulbound Goliath now down to 1/3 max HP while it's at 48% for Abrakeydabra. They're maintaining this kind of 13 to 15% boss buffer, and both teams are at the exact same trash percentage now. So Method EU certainly starting to get away a bit with this one, and coming up is the huge pull that they boasted that they're going to do. So if they can pull off whatever they have in their minds, it should set them well ahead of Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Thorn ability, Alstred actually got hit by it, so there's nothing he can do about it really to avoid it completely compared to Xaylia, of course. Now, again, Xaylia at this point, 0% mana, no Innervate available, but now probably can tank Goliath through until he dies. He probably does not have to drag the boss again into the fire, and then there's not going to be any AoE damage except tank damage, and Xaylia should be fine. But we see him, we see Xaylia actually taunt the boss to make sure that now is not getting stacks and damage. Very well done by Method U to avoid any sort of AoE because they know Xaylia's in.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is we've seen other teams do this in previous weeks as well. You just kind of ping-pong the boss back and forth. He is particularly slow, and this is a huge boss area, very long. I want to see one more taunt coming out of Xaylia just at the end there as the Soulbound Goliath finally does fall for Method EU. They park themselves outside of the hall to Raal's area and collect themselves for a moment, make sure Xaylia has mana, and now they're going to do that big juicy pull that they were coveting earlier right now. Whole hall being pulled here as now has popped his Swiftness pod already running down the arena, grabbing absolutely everything and waiting for it to round the corner. They have to be really careful with the explosives here. It looks like they didn't actually pull all the survivalists in the room as well, but this is a very scary pull. huge amounts of splash damage going out all over the group. You got to make sure you keep on top of all the explosives as well. Zayla just pumping out as much healing as possible. Huge HPS coming in from now as well, as Fragments is just demolishing all of the trash here with his Unholy DK.
And just huge damage coming out of the DK area, and a lot of damage on the group. You can see there's so many maggots. You can see them spawn right now. There's so many. They don't have nameplates, but the whole floor is filled with them. You can see the spit debuffs on everybody now. Unfortunately, we can't see how many spit debuffs there are in the players because we are limited to 3, but there's probably like 2 or 3 on all of them.
But Abrakeydabra answering here as they pulled all of Raal's room together right on top of the boss. They've only dealt with their second reaping. Typically we see teams grab the third reaping on top of this room, but they decided to jump the gun a bit and just deal ahead of time without Bloodlust available. They're now 30 seconds on that reset as Method EU is grabbing their third round of reaping as well, and they're dealing quite carefully with it on the side along with the marksman. They're not doing the coveted 1 million DPS pull from Unholy DKs that we've seen before, so rather they're combining it with the survivalist and the marksman on the side. Unfortunately, one of the explosives does slip out on Method EU side. Fortunately, no deaths for them or cheat death proc for Gingy there, so they're nice and safe for now as Abrakeydabra is just on the cusp of proccing their third reaping on top of Raal, who's now at 68%.
I wonder if they changed up the strategy because they were faster than usual and didn't have their Bloodlust ready, because they did have a couple of seconds on their Bloodlust, and maybe they were just saying, you know what, we can't do this pull without it, because they did tell us about this pull and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
But at this point, they still have the trash left in this room that they're going to pull on top of the boss, and they're most likely going to pop their Bloodlust, as we can see it right now. Now at this point, Method EU is behind on the boss's tree, but they're 10% trash ahead, so this is still a very close matchup between those two.
I very much predict that Abrakeydabra is once again saving their Bloodlust for a combination with Lord and Lady Waycrest plus all of the trash downstairs there. Else they would have popped it by now. Raal is now at 50% on their side. Divine Field getting quite low there, unfortunately. Sat just a bit too long in one of those puddles on the ground, which do a tremendous amount of damage on this boss. Really the only thing that does damage on this boss are those green goop piles on the floor, so you certainly want to move out of those, and those do accumulate over the course of the fight based on the breath from the boss. Finally, Bloodlust falls off here for Method EU as they look to deal with the rest of this fourth reaping wave that they did proc with all of the trash from Raal's room. They've kind of closed the gap just a bit in terms of raw boss percentage, but Abrakeydabra started well ahead of time, and as Nagura mentioned, we still have an entire reaping wave plus 2% for Abrakeydabra to catch up. I don't know if this 35% boss difference is going to be enough time for them unless they make a very bold pull.
Yeah, at this point, I think 22% is just so much in this dungeon in general. But then one more thing to note is that Abra does have their Bloodlust available, so it's most likely what you said before, that they're just going to pull the whole thing with the next boss, the whole room with the next boss. But that's something we've seen Method EU do before without Bloodlust already. Now, it was different affixes, of course, in the cups, and we also had Fortified instead of Tyrannical, but it's probably easier to pull the trash on top of the boss in a tyrannical setting, so it should be possible for Method EU to do without their Bloodlust as well. So I don't assume they're gonna pull smaller from here. We can see them even pull more trash here from the kitchen on top of Raal, so they're gonna be super high percentage-wise, and they probably only have to deal with the trash in the next boss room. They can just skip everything up until that point.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the plan, to go straight to the basement with this Raal now at 31%, and Gingy did proc his cheat death there, grabbing some of those pulls, and a lot of damage coming in from those maggot spits, not to mention the Rune Weaver on top of now, but they have managed to stabilize here for Method EU as Abrakeydabra having a little eat before the basement, 64% on the board, and they have killed Raal already. I'm not exactly sure what we're about to find out right now as they do a fairly substantial pull. They drag a lot from upstairs all the way downstairs right now, if I'm not, oh no, they're actually dragging the entire hallway upstairs, something that you don't see teams typically do. Alma's in there as well. She has Decaying Touch on the tank, which can be spell reflected for 15% damage taken increase for, I think it's about 8 seconds or so. You really never see this trash pulled, but I guess it's worth it for them. It's working out, and they still have not popped their Bloodlust. They'll be using that likely downstairs. We're all about to fall here for Method EU.
If I'm not mistaken, I think this was a pull Method EU did the very, very first time they did Waycrest Manor, when they had a completely different strategy back then, and I was kind of surprised they would pull the trash and pull the mini-boss here. But I think that's exactly what Abrakeydabra just did there, so interesting to see how they just changing up their strategy like that, doing something that Method EU has done a long, long time ago. But Method EU at this point, done with the boss, they're 86% trash, so there's really not much trash left for them to do. They, of course, do have the 2 bosses, and again, it's a tyrannical setting, so it's going to take a long time.
Important to note as well, we just didn't see it because of the debuff limit cap on these current party frames, but now did proc his cheat death trinket. That Bonsamdi's bargain trinket has proc. He's not going to have that available for the rest of the dungeon along with Bloodlust. Bloodlust, which has been now popped here on the side of Abrakeydabra. As expected, it was combined combined with Lord and Lady Waycrest here and all of the witches downstairs, including the Soul Charmer that will drop the candles on the ground, the warding candles. Want to make sure to move out of that, not to decrease damage by 50% taken on the trash there. Method EU following suit with the exact same pull without the availability of Bloodlust, and their tank now is actually very vulnerable right now, does not have the assistance of that trinket either.
Yeah, both of those teams having 0 deaths actually. So insane how clean both of those teams are playing this dungeon right now with those crazy pulls both of the teams are doing, having such a clean run, 0 deaths here. Method EU, of course, not having the Bloodlust available, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to pull off this huge trash pull with the boss. But again, there's no real affix that makes the boss fight harder. I mean, it's tyrannical, of course, but none of the other affixes making it hard. There's no grievous, nothing like that. Now, teaming, of course, doesn't affect the boss fight. Explosive, of course, does, but on boss fights it doesn't spawn it often, and you can deal with it really easily on boss fights, so not a problem at all for them.
Not a problem, and Abrakeydabra about 1 phase ahead in terms of healing from Lady Waycrest right now. Every time Lord Waycrest goes down to 35%, she'll start to channel 30 or siphon 30% of her health into him. So 1 more siphon from her, and then she will join the fight at 10% whilst healing Lord Waycrest to his last 100% health. Method EU just hitting that 40% on Lady Waycrest now and starting to do as much as they can to Lord Waycrest just to make sure they catch up with Abrakeydabra. But the difference to pay attention to here is the 11% trash on the board. It looks like Abrakeydabra is a bit ahead because of the boss percentages here. They will certainly down this boss first, but will it be with enough time for them to backtrack after killing Gorak Tul and the horrors? They will have to backtrack upstairs. They'll have to likely go to the survivalist room and kill 11% worth of trash there, whereas Method EU will just be done once Gorak Tul is killed. So it's going to be quite a tight race at the end of it.
Yeah, we actually see one of the marked sisters here, which is just one sister that stands in the very corner of the room. You can pull the rest of the trash and kind of just like avoid her, just to see her in the back and deal with the boss. As long as you don't walk close enough to her, you're not going to get in combat. But they pulled her. I'm not sure if it was an accident or if it was intentional. I assume it was intentional. It's Method EU after all. They had some very clean runs, some very coordinated runs, so I assume it was intended. But a lot of tank damage. You can see now just kind of dashing around, making sure that he doesn't get hit here as he drops very low, but they should be able to recover at this point as both Lady Waycrest and Lord Waycrest are active.
Yeah, they're about to fall here though for Abrakeydabra, and now finally it really seems like Method EU's single target damage prowess kind of helped him catch up a fair bit to Abrakeydabra here, doing the exact same pulls without Bloodlust, and they're not killing the bosses too much after them. In fact, almost at the same time right now, as Method EU is going to grab the remaining horrors and run over to Gorak Tul's room and cleave them all down together, likely around the corner. Abrakeydabra looking to do the exact same thing, but they have a tall task here. Not only do they need to kill the horrors in Gorak Tul, but as I mentioned earlier, they will need to run back upstairs and still kill a bunch more trash that just won't be finished up from these Gloom horrors. Method EU running downstairs right now grabs indeed Gorak Tul against the side of the room. Gloom horrors will follow suit, and now it is just a pure DPS race, which unfortunately Method EU, Nagura, just showed they have the stronger numbers for.
Yeah, this needs to be for Abrakeydabra to win. It needs to be a wipe coming in from Method EU basically here, because now this pull we've talked about before is dangerous because we have all those horrors here. Now we see the healers jump onto the latch, so the horrors don't jump, so you can avoid that damage. But the tank is still getting a lot of damage. Not only does he have to tank a tyrannical boss, but he also has to tank all those horrors, and this is why you see the tank actually not dropping that low, as Sally casts a Solar Wrath on the boss.
Yeah.
but still a difficult fight. It's going to take quite a long time. And again, just backtracking afterwards for Abrakeydabra, there's no way they can beat Method EU unless Method EU makes a mistake, because not only do they have to do more trash, but Method EU is also ahead on boss percentage.
Yeah, I mean, this is just pretty much going to be all she wrote, bar any disaster for Method EU here. I mean, to come from about 2 phases, so to speak, behind on Lord and Lady Waycrest earlier without Bloodlust, and then to surpass the damage of Abrakeydabra that did have Bloodlust available, I mean, they're just performing top-notch here as a couple of Gloom Horrors finally start to leak in on the side for Method EU. They don't want to kill they don't want to kill them just yet, as it will proc the Reaping, but I think one of them actually did end up leaking in there. Actually, no, that was a Slave. Oh, no, there's a Gloom Horror in there.
Horror,
yeah, so if they do kill that, it'll proc their last Reaping Wave on top of Gorak Tul. Really won't be the end of the world. I mean, it'll just be a bit of a pain in the butt. People will have to move around for any Shadow Smashes that come over the group. But Gorak Tul now down to 48% for Method EU. Abrakeydabra just about to hit that 50% mark. They're kind of keeping tabs on Method EU's damage now, but unfortunately, like we mentioned earlier, still 11% trash that they didn't backpedal and do at the top.
Yeah, let's talk about the mana again. As I mentioned before, Mistweavers usually have some mana issues, and we can see it right here on Gorak Tul, 40%, which is still a lot to go in a 20-kill setting. And Elstrad is very low on mana, while Celia basically is has 60-70% mana, doesn't really have to. Doesn't really care about mana at all at this point, just going into cat form. That it did proc their reaping, as you mentioned, because one of those horrors went through, which should have been just a seed, but it's not the end of the world. They can deal with it as long as there's not too many casters. Casters are usually the ones that are the most dangerous ones because of those grave bolts coming through, but there's not that many, so they can just interrupt them and just AoE nuke them down, and then all there's left to do is Gorak Tul. So very clean strategy by Mythic EU here, and Abrakeydabra is also having 0 deaths. They just were slower. I think their strategy was just slower, or they had less damage, but I do believe the strategy is what made Mythic EU be so fast here.
Yeah, but I mean, Mythic EU closes out the series 2-0 right now, and they cheer in the background. Cheers all around for Mythic EU once again. Not only not dropping a series today, but not dropping a game either, as they send Abrakeydabra down to the lower bracket.
Mythic EU continuing to be undefeated as they send Abrakeydabra down to the depths there. Unfortunately, the Monk was not enough, as they do end up going down that lower bracket, Slew.
I mean, it was a mistake, Weaver. What can I say? Like, it just did not work out for them. But no, I mean, no, you know, to a certain, no hate on the healer choice per se, but I do think that just advantage in terms of strat and just pure damage. I mean, we saw it. They started Gorak Tul 2 to 3% behind Abrakeydabra and then finished it like 15% ahead. There's just no comparison.
Without a question. And in some cases, I think some of the talent choices were a little bit questionable on the Monk as well. I mean, Nagura, you pointed out how he was ended up being, but by taking life cycles, which is just the talent that really promotes using Vivify and enveloping and kind of bouncing back and forth, it starts consuming so much mana. So while you will be saving a lot of mana by using those different abilities, the more that you're using enveloping, the more you just end up burning through your mana. And it happened a number of times throughout this run here, Sours.
Oh yeah, Mythic EU was off to a great start in this dungeon, getting really good kill times on the first 2 bosses. And then, due to some changes in the routing, actually it seemed to be that it was Abrakeydabra that seemed to be pulling ahead, where they downed the next 2 bosses a little bit faster. But because of the difference in the way that these 2 teams ended up moving throughout the dungeon and how they were managing their kill count, we could see just why Mythic EU was so confident in their route in this dungeon. Because Abrakeydabra, while they did manage to kill Lord and Lady Waycrest slightly sooner than Mythic EU was able to, it didn't matter at all because Mythic EU had that extra 11% kill count. So the time of a couple of seconds is not the same as the time of 11% of trash count.
Not a question. And let's take it over to the stage here, as this is going to be interviewing Gingy from Mythic EU.
Thanks, Jack. So playing at home, you can watch the other teams while you're playing, but at a LAN like this, you don't know what your opponent is up to. Does not knowing put you at an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, we've never actually looked at other opponents while playing at home. It was just like, why would we change what we do? We've been practicing something like 100 times, and we just stick to the plan that we've been working on. So that information never really changed what we have been doing in the dungeons.
Oh, great, so nothing changed. That's great. Do you take a lot of risks on the fly, or is everything more or less calculated while you're playing?
Everything is calculated, like in terms of control, cooldown usage throughout the whole thing. So we never really take any risk. It's like everything's pre-planned.
Okay, so you just took a 2-0 win against your toughest EU opponent. Do you want that win just a little bit more when you're going up against Abrakeydabra?
Say again, sorry, I missed it.
Sorry. You just took a 2-0 win from your toughest EU competitor. Yeah. Do you want that win just a little bit more when you're going up against Abrakeydabra, or is it just a little bit more?
Well, we feel really good. I mean, that was really, really good games. I was a little bit, well, everyone was a little bit nervous about Siege of Boralus because it was a new dungeon that they implemented. So we had no idea like how good the other teams were, and then we see them like, oh, the Mage strat, it's gonna be like some. Then we're thinking they're gonna do some double spotter shenanigans, and that could potentially be good. But we just went with like a normal composition, something we've been playing for the last 3 cups as well, and it ended up working. So, and Waycrest Manor is probably our best dungeon, so we are confident in that one.
Oh, great! Well, that sounds great, and congratulations again. And back to the desk.
Thank you so much, Thist and Gingy there, as Mythic EU doing such an impressive performance, sending Jay and his magicians down into that lower bracket. And it's got to be said, even with them running the same consistent comp all the time, Sours, they've done such a great job with their route innovation, and it really showed on Boralus, and then the consistency there on Waycrest. I mean, we see why it is their best dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this composition is the composition that everybody uses, because it is so good and it is so tested. Now, I think that, like, I don't think the Mistweaver is the reason why Abrakeydabra lost. It really came down to just, like, the way they pulled the dungeon. I think that the idea behind a Mistweaver with then a Death Knight for a res makes a lot of sense to me when you only have the one battle res available, but I just don't think that Mistweaver is doing enough damage. Perhaps, I'm not quite sure. Maybe if they had Way of the Crane. But
I'm ready for Way of the Crane, please. But I think it's a great point because you mentioned it in terms of damage. Look at the last pull with the Gloom Horrors on Gorak Tul, for example. Even if you're standing up on top of a high perch, as both healers were doing, you're still able to put out Sunfires, Moonfires, getting some good dots out there, probably running with High Noon on the side of Azalea there. But in the most that you're really going to be running with damage talents is a Mistweaver, probably Glory of the Dawn, maybe Secret Infusion or something like that, but you can't really do much else damage besides some Crackling Jade Lightnings or something on the side when you're perched up so high there.